Good morning and welcome to Class 21 of Developmental Psychology, Psych 250 at NDSU for the summer 2017 term. We are getting close to the end, folks. Let's see, we have 7 classes left, lecture classes, and then 2 class days when we're going to be having our project. So, let's just kind of cover what we're going to be doing for the next 2 weeks. First, your quiz number 4 is due tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. Now, I know on the syllabus it says today, but Blackboard was down because they were upgrading it over the weekend. So I've extended the deadline, so make sure you take care of that today or tomorrow. Um, on the 21st, which is this Friday, you need to start working on the written portion of your project. Now, that doesn't mean you should wait until then to start. I've posted all the materials on Blackboard under the Projects tab, and I'll be posting a video after class to talk about the project. So be sure to watch that video so you have a good understanding of what we're going to be doing. But you are going to have to read 2 articles, and so you'll need to pick those, read them this week, and start jotting down notes, because on Friday we have our first workshop day for the project, and so you're going to need to have those worksheets done by then. So you're going to need to start reading today, tomorrow, or Wednesday. Now, I will send out an email after class about the time that we're going to meet. Now, we're not going to meet on campus because I just don't think that many people are going to be able to make it. So what we're going to do is do a Google Hangout, and we'll do it in the evenings. I think that's what works best for everyone. And so I'll send out an email, and if you are able to join in, then that's great. If you can't, then I'll have instructions on what you're supposed to do. But it would be really great if everyone could join in so that we can have a chance to talk together as a class, because we are working on a group project together. Um, so be sure to watch that video. Now, Friday, we have scheduled another movie night. And so obviously, if we're going to have class, it's going to be hard to have a movie night. And I think what I'm going to do about the movie nights is this. If you are interested in getting together to watch the movies, then email me and let me know. Otherwise, you can just watch them on your own, and I'll post questions for all the movies on the discussion board. So if you want to take advantage of that opportunity for extra credit, you can do that. If you don't feel like you're going to need it, then don't worry about it. Um, so um, so yes, so that's what we'll do for that. So if you want to come to campus and watch the movies, just email me and let me know. If you'd rather just do it on your own time, that's also fine. Just have that done by the last day of class, which is the 28th. So Friday we have our first workshop, and what you'll do is you'll um, bring your worksheets with you, and we'll talk about what you've jotted down, the notes that you have. I'll answer any questions that you have about how to proceed. And then Friday to that Tuesday, you need to start working on writing it. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot of time, but it's only 1 page, so it shouldn't be that complicated for you to write. Then your written portion of your project is due on Wednesday, July 26th at 11:59 p.m. And on Thursday, the 27th, we'll have our last workshop. And during that workshop, you'll be peer reviewing um, a friend's written portion. And so, how that'll work, we won't actually meet via Google Hangouts. What you'll do is um, you'll I'll pair you up with someone else, and you'll email them your written portion. They'll email you yours or theirs, and then you'll mark it up with the rubric, so with the grading sheet, as if you were me, and then you'll send it back to them, and you'll of course CC me on that email. And what you've turned in on the 26th is your submitted project. But if you want to revise it based on what your classmate gave you recommendations on, you can do that. And then as long as you turn in the final copy to me by the 28th at the end of the day, that's the one I'll grade. Okay? Um, Then Friday the 28th is the last day of class. We'll have our final exam. It will not be on campus, it'll be online again. And my last day of work is the 31st of July. So, drat. Your grades are going to go in on the 31st because after then I'm not going to have access to get in and do it. But the last day to do a SONA is the 6th of August. So, okay, so what we're going to do is this. Honestly, I don't think that anyone needs the extra credit just based off the midterm grades. I'll send out an email about this. I've got to figure it out because I didn't think about that when I told them the 31st was my last day. And I'm moving. I'm actually moving into my new house that day, August 6th. So, yeah, I'll figure it out. I don't think anybody needs the extra credit, but I'll come up with some kind of alternate um, assignment if you want to do that. But I don't really think anybody needs the extra credit. I'll just well I'll send out an email. So just look for the email, and I'll work with whoever needs me to work with them. Okay. So that should be everything in terms of what's coming up. Um, oh, the other thing, because Blackboard was down, um, go in here. I'm going to extend the due date for the discussion board to tomorrow as well. So if you need to, let me make sure the quiz has been in fact extended. Um, Due date the 18th. Yep. Okay. And I'm just gonna go ahead and look at the discussion board. So week 6 discussion board should be up. I'm sorry that that was a problem last week. Um, that the discussion board didn't go out when I meant it to go out. So if you put the answers to the question on week 4, that's fine. I'll make sure that the grade goes on the right. Yeah. Yeah, so week 5 discussion board's also due tomorrow. So don't, if try to get it done as soon as possible, but if you can't get it done today, it's not a big deal. All right. Well, let's talk about class. Or let's start class. Today we're going to be talking about adulthood. We're moving into that fun time of life, adulthood, that we all looked forward to as children, and now we wish that we could go back. I especially wish I could be a child again because I'm sitting here in my house having to pack it like in earnest because I literally have 2 weeks left before I'm gone, and so I'm just like, oh my gosh, I wish I was a kid again. But adulthood, it's fun. I'll have a lot of funny adult memes, adulting, not adult memes, but adulting memes, to help make us all feel a little bit better about the fact that we all are in this horrible club called adulthood. So adulthood is actually 3 different periods. It's not a single period, but in this class we're just covering it as one. And so adulthood can be split into 3 periods based on a lot of developmental psychology theories. The first is early adulthood, and that is from 20 to 40 years. So until you're 40, you're in early adulthood. Yay! And then middle adulthood is 40 to 65. And then late adulthood is 65 to 85 or 90 years. And the reason there's sort of a if or um, endpoint on late adulthood is 85 is the average lifespan of a man and 90 is the average lifespan of a woman. So you technically after 85 or 90, if you're still alive, then you're just in, oh my god, I can't believe you're still here, adulthood. No, I'm just kidding. Late adulthood runs until death. So I could have put 65 to death, but that just seems really morbid, so I didn't. Um, so yes, maybe this is encouraging. Maybe you're in your mid 30s and you're like, oh good, I'm still in early adulthood. Maybe you're in middle adulthood and you didn't realize it and you're like, damn, I thought I was still in early adulthood. So every semester in my in-person classes, I ask them to tell me. So it's blank, right? And I ask them to tell me, okay, what age ranges. And every year they say middle adulthood starts at 25. Like, excuse me, I'm not that old. So I enjoy that. Um, Now, there is not so much a period of development, but I don't know what to call it, like a optional time frame or time period that a lot of Western adults go through, and it's called emerging adulthood, and that is from um, 18 to 25. So you'll notice adolescence technically doesn't end until the age of 19 is over. But emerging adulthood is sort of the subgrouping that straddles adolescence and then parts of early adulthood. And it's 18 to 25, and it's this period where you're technically an adult and you're physically an adult, but you're still socially treated somewhat like a child or an adolescent. Um, and we only see this period in societies, highly industrialized societies, which have a high rate of people going to college. And we only see it really amongst populations who are in college or technical school. And it's because you're not have not fully taken on an adult role yet in your life. So we won't really talk about that so much in this class, but it is something just to be mindful of. So, as we move into adulthood, our lecture today will cover physical changes in adulthood. And I hate to tell you, but it's pretty much all downhill from here. Um, I like to say that I've reached cruising altitude. I turned 25 in May, and that's really where you start to peak in terms of development, and then it all starts to go back down. But it's not like you go up and then down. I mean, you go up, and then there's sort of a gradual, like, you're just kind of cruising along for a while, and then you start a gradual descent in middle age, or middle adulthood. So I like to say that I'm at cruising altitude now. I can take my seatbelt off and roam about the cabin, but I do need to be careful because contents in the overhead bin may have shifted during takeoff. Um, but it's all relative, right? Some people love their 20s. Some people start to feel old in their 20s. Some people love their middle agedness and or love being a late adult, and so it's all relative to what you feel is the right age for you. I hate this time of my life. I I'm getting to the point now where I have regrets about things I didn't do when I was a teenager, and I'm also frustrated because I feel like I'd like to be treated with a little bit more respect than I currently am treated. I get tired of people saying, "Well, you're only 25," and it's like, yeah, well, what were you doing at 25? It's like my life is hard. So, so yeah, it's all relative. Okay, so what I'd like for you to write about, I should have changed this and I didn't, sorry, for your discussion for today is I'd like for you to tell me what physical changes are you looking forward to in the most in adulthood, and what physical changes are you looking forward to the least? So tell me all about it. I want to know. And this should be on discussion board 6 and then class 21. So what physical changes are you looking forward to the most in adulthood, and what physical changes are you looking forward to the least in adulthood? During adulthood, we start to see changes in several different areas. The first is general well-being. And so this is just our overall wellness, our overall state of health. Um, We see changes in height, weight, and exercise. So in adulthood, we start to get heavier and we start to exercise less. We see changes in illness. Illness becomes much more serious the older we get. Changes in sleep patterns, the amount of sleep that we need when we start to sleep, when we wake up, that changes. Reproduction starts to slow down in the 30s and 40s and is non-existent pretty much throughout most of late all of late adulthood and about half of middle adulthood. So that is something that peters off. And then substance use. There is differences in substance use depending on um, different life circumstances. And then we'll talk a little bit about the physical and emotional connections and how our physical health in adulthood and our emotional health in adulthood are very much intertwined. So, like I said, when you're in your 20s, you kind of reach your cruising altitude, and that is because our body is at its best in our late teens and 20s. And then once we get out of our late teens and 20s, we start to go through biological aging, and this is called senescence. And in senescence, there are two theories as to what happens in senescence. The first deals with telomeres. Now, you remember we talked about chromosomes very early on in the semester. Now, chromosomes are essentially these long strands of DNA. Oh, that's awful. So imagine that these are actually double helixes. And so this is basically what a chromosome looks like. It's this long strand of DNA, right? And so at the end of each chromosome, there's a telomere, which is this little cap. And it holds these God, that looks awful. It holds these strands together. Now, over time, it starts to fall apart, and what we end up having is these chromosomes start to unravel a little bit. And that unraveling is what leads to aging. That's one theory. Another theory is that of random effects. In other words, our DNA starts to become damaged as a result of multiple mutations. And so our DNA is mutating all of the time. This is how evolution works. Our DNA, certain aspects of our DNA strengthen based on our experiences, some of it weakens. Um, Over time, though, all of that replication, that mutation of the DNA, starts to damage it, and that's what causes aging. So that's another theory. While we don't know for sure why we age, we do know that we do see systematic declines as we get older, meaning things start to fall apart in a pretty predictable pattern. Um, our joints start to give out, our memory starts to fade, our eyesight gets bad, our hearing gets bad, our sense of taste goes away, our reproductive abilities cease. It's system wide. It's not like one part of us gets old and the other part doesn't. The entire thing ages, the entire body ages pretty much at the same rate. And the decline is pretty much the same across all systems. We start to see declines in our early adulthood. So even though we're cruising, we still start to see some decline. So the first thing to go is our vision and hearing. And it doesn't actually leave, but we start to have sensitivity. So our eyesight stops being as clear as it used to be. Our hearing stops being as clear as it used to be. I'm already having this experience. I wear glasses, and even with glasses, sometimes I have trouble focusing and seeing things clearly. We also start to see hair graying and thinning. Now this happens in the late 20s and 30s for some people. For other people, it happens in the late 30s. My brother-in-law already has receding hair, and he's younger than me. So um, I have not found a gray hair yet. When I do, the entire world will hear it because I will scream. Um, Fortunately, I dye my hair, so it probably will be a long time before I find it. Um, but I am living a little bit in dread of that moment happening. We have we also start to see speed, differences in speed and endurance. So speed, how fast we can go, peaks in our early 20s. So until this point, we were able to run really, really fast. But by our early 20s, we peak out. We don't run as fast as we used to. So over the next 10 years or so, um, we start to see um, that speed going down. But what we do see is endurance peaking at the late 20s, meaning we're able to may not be able to run as fast in our in our 20s, late 20s, but we're able to run longer. And so that's good. We see it's not like we lose speed and endurance at the same time. And just because something peaks doesn't mean that it is suddenly horrible. It just means that you stop getting better and it just kind of like starts to decline. But because it endurance peaks later in the 20s, that means it declines later as you get older. Now, if you are training athletically, that decline is much more gradual than if you're like me and you sit on like, the couch all day and eat potato chips. Um, the declines are pretty rapid if you're lazy. Um, in terms of cardiovascular and respiratory health, declines are very gradual and early in middle adulthood, so that's good. We have not have much change in our cardiovascular respiratory systems. As we move into late adulthood, though, we start to see thickening of the heart muscle, and that reduces reduces our capacity. And so the best way to describe this is to use the Diet Coke. So our heart is okay. So our heart is a pump, right? And so blood comes in and out. And so we have this. It'd be better if I had more. There's more liquid in it, but there isn't. Um, so over time, the heart constricts back and forth like this. And as we get older, it starts to it starts to thicken. And so it doesn't. It won't work. This is gonna blow it up, but it won't work. It gets tighter and tighter, and so it doesn't push. There's not as good of movement, right? So if you have good movement and you've got good um, hard and strong pumps, it's going to move the blood faster. But if it's constricted and you're not going in very fast, it's not pushing the blood out as fast. And so what happens is the blood pumps with less force, and then less oxygen is delivered to the body tissues. And our cardiovascular and respiratory systems work together in that we take in oxygen, and then that oxygen is transported throughout our body in the form of blood. And so if we are not getting as much blood to our tissues, then we're not getting as much oxygen. And so blood is delivered to body tissues in the order of which they're close to the heart. So like this part of your body gets oxygen first. This part gets oxygen first because the heart's right here. So it's like anything right in here gets it fast. Your fingers, your toes, your legs get blood slower because it's having to go a lot further. And if you've got heart muscle that's not pumping with as much force, the blood isn't getting there as quickly. And so that could be another reason we age, is that, our body starts to get oxygen deprivation, or less oxygen than it is accustomed because of how slow the heart is or how constricted the heart is. On top of that, we start to see lung tissue losing elasticity, about 50% in fact. And then lungs produce less oxygen and expel less CO2 or carbon dioxide. And so what it means by elasticity, think about like your pajama pants or your underclothes. They've got that elastic, right? And so when you stretch out and come back, it goes in and out really fast. Now think about if you have like a pair underwear is like the best example, so I'm just going to use it. You have a pair of underwear that you love, it's like super comfortable, and you keep it until it falls apart, and then you just like continue to like patch it up with paper clips or safety pins and like um, needle and thread because they're your favorite, right? We all have that pair of underwear. well, the elastic starts to give out, right? And by the end of that underwear's like life for you, they don't really work anymore because the elastic is just it's given out. And so you stretch it out and it just kind of stays out. It doesn't go back in. And so that's what happens with the lungs. Is the lungs start to lose that elasticity. And so as they lose elasticity, it becomes harder and harder to breathe because the lung is like basically like a pump too. I mean, as you breathe, what's happening when you're breathing is the muscles in your lungs are pulling the lung out, and it's the pressure differential. It's pulling oxygen into your body, and then the elasticity does that, pushes all of that well, not oxygen anymore, all the air, which has now been converted to CO2, pushes all that out. And so if you're taking in less oxygen, then you're not putting as much oxygen into your blood, and then your heart isn't pumping as well anyway, so that's even less oxygen. So essentially, and this sounds really horrible, but it's the truth, we essentially start to suffocate to death as we get older, because if you can't expel as much CO2, CO2 is really bad for you. You can't survive on it. So it starts to wear out all of our systems because we're not able to bring in oxygen and and transport it as well as we used to. In late adulthood, we also start to see changes in bone mass. So this doesn't really happen in your 20s and 30s, but it does happen in your 40s onward. And what happens is the bone mineral content starts to decline, and this reduces the density. So the density of a thing is how thick it is. And so over time, as the mineral depletion starts, the bones become less dense. They become more brittle. It's kind of like if you have a candy cane and you put candy canes on your Christmas tree and then you put them in the box that goes back in the attic, right? And they get like all gooey because it's really hot up there, and then it refreezes in the winter, and you get them out, and like candy canes are already like they snap easily, but like they've melted and hardened, like they come kind of like much more bendable. You know what I'm talking about? They're less dense. They've lost density, and so that's what happens to our bones as they become much more volatile. About 8 to 12% of men or men lose about 8 to 12% of their bone density, but women lose about 20 to 30% of their bone density, and that's a huge loss. And the reason this happens for women is um, estrogen increases the absorption of minerals. And after menopause, women are no longer producing estrogen, and so they're not absorbing minerals in the same way that they used to. Now, this can lead to a condition called osteoporosis, and you probably heard this about this through a commercial. But osteoporosis is severe age-related bone loss. This is when you lose a lot of your bone density. You become very, very fragile. Now, fortunately, there are ways around the negative effects of loss of bone mass. Exercise and calcium supplements can reduce mineral loss. So, if you're not able to absorb them naturally, we absorb minerals and vitamins just by the foods that we eat. But if you're not able to absorb them as well, you can get sublingual mineral supplements where you put a drop of liquid under your tongue and it's absorbed through your bloodstream, so you don't have to have that same absorption experience that happens when you digest food. So we do start to see vision and hearing sensitivity in early adulthood, but by middle and late adulthood we start to have some serious problems with vision and hearing. So in terms of vision in middle adulthood, we see an increase in a condition called presbyopia. And presbyopia is a disease when the lens of the eye loses its capacity to adjust to objects of varying distances. And so if you've taken a class like sensation and perception, you've probably already seen this diagram, but I'm going to do it again. And it's not going to look as good as something like you would see if it was drawn by an artist, but we're used to this by now, right? So this is a side angle of your eyeball. So if it were to come out of your head and we were to cut it in half, this is what we'd see on the side. And this right here is the giant nerve that takes all the information to your brain. Now, in the center of your eyeball, you have a lens. Okay? And on the back of your eyeball, you have what are called rods and cones, and they are little receptors that receive all of the light that's coming in. And so, and then right here, this is your pupil. This little entryway is your pupil. And then surrounding your pupil is a muscle called the iris. So my iris is blue. I've got blue eyes. How do I change the color? There we go. I have a blue iris. And the whole point of this, the color of your eye is just a muscle. And that muscle opens and closes the pupil. It makes it bigger or smaller. It dilates it or contracts it. And what happens when you see is light comes in. Dun, 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 it hits the lens and it's refracted off of the lens and it's received by these rods and cones who perceive the shapes that are discernible within the light and in the shadow, and then they transmit that information to change the color. I'll never use sensation and perception. Why would I need to take this class? Where is the mouse? I can't see it because the ink is like not a good color. What's a good information color? Orange. So then the rods and cones transmit this information to the brain where your brain interprets what it's seeing. So actually what we see, this is pretty fascinating. We don't really see things as they are. We see our own perception of them. One time someone told me um, that perception doesn't matter, and I laughed and said perception is everything because we don't see, I'm not looking at this Coke bottle, right? I'm looking at what I perceive it to be. I mean, that's the reality. Um, it's based on my experience and based on my brain development. I look at something and I'm able to perceive what it looks like based off of my own perception and my own sensory capacities, which might explain why we find certain people attractive but not other people when everyone is equally attractive in their own way, just based on our perception. So what happens with presbyopia is this lens loses its capacity to adjust to different distances. So in other words, we're not able to see this lens isn't able to adjust itself to account for like larger distances. Now, this fortunately can be corrected with bifocals, and so bifocals are those glasses. Your grandmother probably has them, or you might have. My dad has them. That was hard for him. So here are glasses, and they're purple because obviously the only glasses worth having are purple. So here are your glasses, and bifocals are the glasses that have those little like weird like thing right here. That's a lens of a different um, thickness, and so it's able to account for things that are farther away. Now, in late adulthood, oh, and also in middle adulthood, because of this issue with the lens, you need more light to see. If you don't have as much light, the rods and cones are not able to discern things as well. Now, in late adulthood, we start to experience cataracts. And cataracts are cloudy areas in the lens of the eyes resulting in foggy vision or blindness. And I always had a hard time understanding what a cataract was. And then I took sensation and perception and it changed everything. It changed my perception. Okay, so within the eyeball, we have, and I don't know if eyeball is an actual like scientific term. That's what Southern people call an eye, so I'm just what I call it. Because I had last semester students were laughing at me because I had said that. So within your eye, within your eye, there's this fluid. Okay, and the fluid protects the lens. It keeps everything because our head bounces around a lot, so it keeps everything. This is all very delicate equipment here, and it keeps it all. Um, It keeps it all from getting damaged. Now, over time, trash builds up in that liquid. And that's what a cataract is. It's this trash and it just floats around. Sometimes they're called floaters. They just floats around and you'll be walking around and you'll kind of see like this little shadow or like specks just kind of floating around in your vision. That's a cataract. You can have them at any age. I mean, I've from time to time I'll see a little like what looks like a little string or something in my eye, and it's just because there's some trash in there. Um, Fortunately, cataracts are really easy to get rid of. They just laser them out, but they can be very frustrating. Um, but what is very unfortunate and what you unfortunately can never recover from is macular degeneration. Now, macular degeneration the is the breaking down of the macula. Now, the macula is part of the system of muscles that makes vision. Um, Sorry, I'm got an email. You're like, Darcy, you always have an email. So, sorry. Let me make sure I have the color. Yes, okay. I want the color that I want. Okay, so the back of your eye down here is called the retina. Okay, that's where the rod and cones are. And right about here is the macula. And the macula is it looks yellow if you look at it under. I guess I should have done yellow, but I already don't use yellow. Um, it's called the region of keenest vision. In other words, it's where the light best hits, and it starts to wear out over time. And what ends up happening is you have blurred vision, and then eventually you lose your vision because you start to lose the light sensitive cells in the macula. So you're still able to see, but you're not able to see as clearly because where you're getting the best vision, the most light to discern what you're looking at is right here. And so that just starts to wear out. And it just happens, not to everybody, but it happens over time, especially to people who strain their eyes a lot. We also start to lose hearing. And this happens about the age of 30, so that's a little bit scary for me because I'm 5 years away. But you start to experience what's called presbycusis, and this is age-related hearing impairment that results in noticeable loss of hearing at high frequencies. And so here's what happens with that. You've got your ear, some purple skin. So you've got your ear, okay, and let's put a little earring on it because it's a cool ear. So we got an earring, okay. So we've got our ear, color purple, okay, and we've got this tube that goes in, and then we've got this, like little thing, cochlear, and sound comes in, and it's all transmitted to the brain. Okay, so within this part of the ear right here, we've got these little hairs, and these little hairs vibrate, and that vibration allows for the rest of the ear to interpret the sounds that are to transmit the sound waves, the frequency of the sounds that we're receiving back to the brain. And then the brain again perceives what it hears. So we don't actually hear anything. And just like we obviously we hear things, but we don't hear things as maybe other people hear them. So for example, I sound different on recording than I do in real life. Um, at least to me. Now, to you, I sound the same, but to me, I sound different. And the reason that is when we talk, our brain interprets both what we get through our ear as well as the vibrations of our facial bones. So when I'm talking, there's a lot of vibration going on in my throat, in my mouth, and my nose, and my brain is able to synthesize all of those vibrations, the frequency of those vibrations, with the frequency of what I'm hearing back through my ears, and it creates a composite voice that I hear. So the voice that I hear is very different than the voice that you hear. Pretty cool, huh? And that's an example of how our sensation and perception of things really determines how we see and view things. So what happens with presbycusis is over time, sound comes in, and depending on the frequency, it pushes these hairs back and forth. And if you are exposed to a lot of loud noises, that's high frequency noises, over time those hairs start to lay back, and then they just don't ever come back up. And so you start to have hearing loss because you're not able to pick up as many vibrations. It's all about those vibrations, man. Now, like I said, this begins around the age of 30, and you start to lose high frequency sounds. In other words, really high pitch, really loud sounds. And eventually you lose the ability to discriminate complex tone patterns, and that's just because you don't have the structures in good working order anymore. This can be problematic because it can impact how you perceive people's speech. So you'll hear older people say, "What'd you say? Can you repeat that? I can't hear you. Can you say it louder?" And fortunately for women, this isn't so much of a problem as it is for men. Men see great declines in hearing, and a large reason for that is because men tend to do jobs that are loud or noisy, like construction jobs or working with heavy machinery. And so over time, hearing that noise over and over again wears your ears out. So it's good to wear noise canceling earphones. It'd be interesting to see, like in the next 20 years or so, if these gender related differences go away with the advent of earbuds and people like blaring music into their ears. So it's worth a thought. So we see losses in hearing and vision. What about our other senses? Well, we start to see the greatest declines in our other senses in late adulthood. So if you're in your 40s or your 50s or your 60s, well, your 40s or your 50s, you're good. So at or after the age of 60, we do see a reduced sensitivity to taste. And so you'll notice a lot of older people put a lot of salt and pepper on their food. It's because they can't taste it as well. So our taste buds wear out. We also start to lose our sense of smell. And so that's a lot of times why older people don't always smell pretty. They don't really know that they don't smell good. Or they might wear too much perfume because they can't smell what the reasonable amount that they put on to start with. And then we start to have a gradual loss of sense of touch, particularly in our fingertips. And a lot of that probably has to do with the lack of oxygen that's flowing to our extremities because of the weakening of the heart muscle. So it kind of sucks to be in late adulthood because you can't smell anything, or you can't see anything, you can't hear anything, you can't smell anything, you can't taste anything, and you can't really feel what you're touching. So it's like, what's the point? It's, but the good thing is it doesn't, just because we see declines does not mean that we see total loss. You can still feel things and smell things and taste things and hear things and see things. It's just not in the same way that you can now or you could 20 years ago when you were much younger. Now, what about weight and exercise? My least favorite part of this class. um, Weight increases during early and middle adulthood. Case in point, when I was 19, I was like super skinny. I weighed like I was like literally nothing. I was like starving away. And now I'm much bigger. And that's because we see weight increases during our early and middle adulthood. Um, we start to see muscle to fat changes. We see a shift that begins mostly during middle adulthood. So about that time we see the shift. For men, the shift is to the back and upper abdomen. So here and in the back. So the dad bod, essentially. Women see increases around their waist and in their upper arms, so like right here. Um, the good news is, even though we see weight increases and the muscle to fat ratio increasing, it does start to decline in late adulthood. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we don't absorb calories as efficiently as we used to. So, um, but that is good. It is good to know that one day I will be a skinny old woman and everyone else can just like suck it. Obesity. Now, obesity is a problem that plagues a lot of adults. Um, Obesity is defined as a body mass index greater than or equal to 30. Now, we can talk about we could talk about how BMI is not really a very reliable indicator of physical health. In fact, some might say that it's sort of a lazy way of looking at physical health and only looks at one aspect. It doesn't look at a person's overall functionality. But for the purposes of simplicity in this class, we're defining obesity the way the medical community does, as a BMI of greater than or equal to 30. Now, this means that 34.9% of adults are obese. So that's a huge problem. Obesity has a lot of negative health outcomes. It basically speeds up every decline imaginable in our physical development. Um, it can shorten our longevity. It can make our quality of life a lot worse. Now, overweight is defined as a BMI between 25 and 30. So, this means that a person is not severely over. Obesity is severe overweight. Obesity or overweight is just you way more than you probably should. This is about 32.6% of Americans. So essentially, what I'm telling you is that 68% of Americans are, or 67, yeah, 68% of Americans are overweight or obese. Now, this is a much larger problem among African American, Latinx, and Native American adults than it is among white adults. It's still a problem among white adults, but it's exponentially larger for African American, Latinx, and Native American adults. The main reason for this is, of course, the high correlation between these populations and being low SES. Obesity and being overweight is tied to having a lower income because a lot of times you can't afford to eat healthy foods. You can't afford to go to the gym. You're working all the time, and so you're like not taking care of your body in the same way. Um, so it is a big problem among low SES white people as well, but it's exponent. Like if you were to compare proportionally speaking, it's just much greater for these other communities. The causes of obesity versus low physical activity, and that needs to be combined with greater caloric and fat intake. So you have to eat a lot of fatty foods and not work out very much. Now, the reason we see this in adolescence and early adulthood as well, or adolescence and teenage or adolescent childhood and adolescence as well. But we see it at greater rates in adulthood, especially towards the end of early adulthood and then middle and late adulthood. And that's because we start to see a natural decline in the basal metabolic rate. The basal metabolic rate is the rate at which you burn calories. Calories are just energy. Calories are just a measure of energy. So when we take in fat, when we take in food, it contains sugars, and we need those sugars to burn as fuel, and that burning process is your metabolism. And so when your basal metabolic rate is really high, like when you're an adolescent boy, for example, have really high basal metabolic rates, you burn calories very quickly. Meaning it doesn't matter what you eat, it's going to burn off really fast. But as you get older, that rate slows down. Mine has like slowed way down in just the last like 6 months, and I can tell because I'm not hungry as much as I used to be. Because I'm not don't need as many calories to burn. And so when your metabolic rate goes down and you don't stop eating the same amount of food you ate when your rate was high, it means you're going to be storing calories because whatever you don't burn is going to be stored in adipose tissue or fat. And so as people get older, if they don't adjust their eating patterns and their exercise patterns to their new physical development period, then they're going to continue to gain. They're going to gain weight and potentially become obese. So what about exercise? I hate exercise. It's literally the worst thing ever. Like, who invented it? Like, what's the point? Like, I don't want to feel like a hamster running on a treadmill. I'm actually looking forward to moving back to Alabama because I'm going to start running again. I used to run 3 miles every day, and then I messed up my knees. And so I can't run on a treadmill because it's too uh, rigid and hard. But I can run like outside if I run like in the grass. So I'm looking forward to that. I can't really do that here because I don't have anywhere to run, and it's like too cold most of the time. So I'm looking forward to that. Um, but I hate going to the gym. It's so awful. Everyone's just staring at you, or at least you feel that way. And the way that I feel about exercise is shared by most of the adult population because only 23% of adults engage in regular exercise. And regular exercise is like engaging in intentional, strenuous exercise for about 30 minutes or more. However, exercise has a lot of great benefits to people in adulthood. For example, reduced fat. If you're exercising, you're increasing your metabolic rate. Um, you know, it's not like a permanent increase, but the more you're exercising, the more energy you need. So your body is burning fat. If you don't have enough food in your stomach, it's going to start burning fat. Um, so you get reduced fat. You also start to see increased muscle tone. Even if you're just doing cardiovascular, you are going to see increased muscle tone in the areas that are enabling you to do that cardiovascular. You start to see a reduced vulnerability to disease. That's because the better shape you're in, the better your immune system is able to fight off infection and fight off disease. You see a reduced risk for cancer, and you also see improved mood because when you exercise, it releases endorphins, which are hormones that help um, you feel better. So there are so many benefits to exercising. It's just literally the most unpleasant thing to do in the world. While it's important at all ages, exercise actually is really, really important for late adults. It improves muscle size, so we see a great dropping off of muscle size in late adulthood. But if you exercise as a late adult, it improves that muscle size, reduces the decline. It improves blood flow to muscles, again, contributing to that increase in muscle size. It can improve your respiratory systems. Remember, I said we start to lose the ability to respirate as well because there's not as much elasticity. Well, the more you exercise, the better capacity you have in that system. And it can also lead to greater cognitive skills, so it keeps you really sharp. So there's a lot of benefits to working out as a late adult. Now, what about illness? What about aging makes illness more dangerous? Well, we start to see decreases in the immune system, um, which are pretty gradual. Um, decrease in immune system and gradual. So the decrease in our immune system is gradual and it begins in early adulthood. That means is that the system that exists of red and white blood cells, or white blood cells I should say, to attack diseases starts to decline a little bit about this time of life. And so you become more vulnerable to disease. Um, Obviously, if you're out of shape, you're unhealthy, it's going to increase that risk. As you get into middle and late adulthood, we start to see some very prevalent issues with the immune system. The first are autoimmune response disorders. Um, And this is where you have a malfunction in your immune system and your body turns against normal body tissues. And so autoimmune response happens. It can happen to people in their 20s, it can happen to people earlier, but on average, it starts to happen a lot during middle adulthood. Now, these problems can become very pronounced in late adulthood. The first type of autoimmune response disorder that you could experience is rheumatic arthritis, or rheumatoid arthritis. And this is inflammation, pain, and stiffness in the joints, and possible deformity and mobility loss. So essentially, what happens is the immune system sees tissues in your joints as being diseases and starts to attack them, and it causes them to inflame and to get very painful, very stiff, and if you don't take medication, they eventually will start to break down because they're being attacked by your immune system, and you'll start to see like people with arthritis can have really twisted hands like this because their joints and their fingers have just given out altogether, and it just starts to fuse together, and it's just really very painful. We also see what's called adult onset diabetes, and this is when your body is resistant to the action of insulin, causing dysregulation of blood sugar. In other words, this is like type 1 diabetes, which we typically see in um, adolescence, but it starts in adulthood. My sister actually has adult onset diabetes, so it can still happen. This type 1 diabetes can still happen in your adult when you become an adult. It's just not as common. And this is different than type 2 diabetes, which is just when you have a hypersensitivity to sugar, and it's not it's not the same. It's different. Not triggered by um, not triggered by taking in large amounts of sugar. And actually, like adult onset diabetes, it's really I'm used to type 2 diabetes. My parents and grandparents have it, where you typically like it's you regulate it by watching your blood sugar, making sure it's not too high, and you don't. If you need to not eat, you may have to like make changes to your diet. Whereas my sister, her type 1 diabetes, she can eat whatever she wants. Her problem isn't that she has too much blood sugar, she doesn't have enough. It's dysregulated to the point where she doesn't have enough. So she has to take insulin to make sure that when she eats, she's able to get enough blood sugar. Otherwise, she could like pass out. It freaks me out a little bit because like I'm used to the other side. I mean, I don't have diabetes, but I am used to like having to restrict things that I like where she doesn't have to restrict anything. She just has to make sure that she doses herself before she eats anything. We start to see changes in sleep patterns beginning in late adulthood. Now, there are declines that start in early adulthood and middle adulthood, and obviously any of these things can happen at any point in your life. But just on average, we see them in late adulthood. And in late adulthood, we see a shift towards earlier bedtimes and earlier wake up times. So it's sort of a recurring joke, like on TV, older people go to bed at like 4 in the afternoon and they get up at like 3 in the morning. Um, and that's because we start to see the need for sleep earlier, and because you only need a certain number of hours, you wake up when you're ready to wake up. So we do see this shift, and a lot of it could have a basis in evolution. I mean, if you're not raising kids anymore, it's really the optimal time to sleep is when older people sleep. Um, there can be a lot of issues, though, associated with sleeping in adulthood, especially in late adulthood. The first is the enlargement of the prostate gland. Now, we talked about that. That's that gland that produces seminal fluid or semen, and it's the back of the penis and testicle structure, and um, right below the bladder. And so, what happens is it starts to um, enlarge. It starts to swell and enlarge, and it starts to push onto the bladder, which means you've got the bladder and you've got the prostate, and the prostate starts to get bigger and it starts to push into the bladder, and the bladder obviously is underneath other structures, so the structures on top are pushing down. So the bladder becomes like this, like it gets pushed down on both sides, and so basically, if you get anything in there, it you have to go because there's not as much space as there used to be. And this is why older men a lot of times use the bathroom a lot because their prostate has enlarged and they're having to use the bathroom more. Or they at least have the sensation that they have to use the bathroom. And that's the reality is you don't necessarily have much in your bladder. It's just your bladder feels like it's full. And so you have to go. The other really awful thing that can happen is the prostate could enlarge into the vesicles that connect the bladder to the urethra or the part of the penis that expels liquid. And if that happens and that tube becomes restricted, it can be very hard to get the urine out. So it can be very painful. It's sort of a start and stop operation. Um, that is a good way, just FYI to the guys in the class when you get older. If you notice that you have to use the bathroom a lot, and when you go, it's like it kind of comes in spurts, you should probably go see your doctor because you probably have something your prostate's probably enlarging. It's kind of an early detection for prostate cancer. Um, and when you get older in late adulthood, you have to have regular prostate exams, which are not pleasant. I'm going to let you figure out how that's done. Needless to say, just think about where it's located and what's the best way to access it. And that's and think of the most humiliating and embarrassing thing that you could ever do with a doctor, and there you go. Um, yeah, I call it the cold finger of injustice. Sleep apnea is another condition that can emerge in late adulthood, though it can emerge earlier. I have sleep apnea. I was diagnosed in 2014. So, or no, 2015. It wasn't that long ago. And so this happens to me, and I was 23 when I was diagnosed. So I mean, it can happen that early. It's pretty uncommon, but mostly you start to see sleep apnea diagnoses happen in middle age and also in older adulthood. But this is the nocturnal collapse of airways which lead to apneas or pauses in respiration, and it's very common in men, but women also have it. My mom and grandmother both have it. And so this is what happens. You're sleeping, here's your neck, green skin. So this is KIF is our model, KIF from Futurama. So you got the person's mouth, their nose. This is not that bad of a picture, to be honest. Okay, well, I said that and then I messed it up. Let me fix it. It's driving me crazy. No! It was a perfect head! Ugh! You're killing me, man. You're killing me. Okay. So the trunk's gonna be bigger than that. So there we go. So not as good as before, but it is what it is. Okay. So you've got the person, they're sleeping. There's their pillow. Yes, this looks incredibly uncomfortable. Just pretend like it doesn't look uncomfortable. Okay, so they're breathing in, and the air comes down through their throat and then into their airway and into their lungs. There's the lungs. Okay. Now what happens is, as you get older, the muscles in your throat start to weaken. As you get older, or as you get um, there's more fat on your neck. So people who have fatter necks or heavier necks, essentially, this also can happen. The muscles start to relax to the point that they can't hold the skin of the neck right here, and the muscles in the neck off of the airway. And so we start to see this sort of collapse onto the airway. And so just as sort of a zoomed in version, here's the airway. It starts to become blocked. And so you're not getting very good airflow. And so you're only getting a small amount of the air that you need into your airway. So it's coming in and it's slowing down and then it continues on its way. And so what happens is you stop breathing and that's called an apnea. So your sleep, this is what it looks like. This is very graceful. And then you jolt awake because your brain registers that you're not breathing anymore. That's exactly what it sounds like. It's incredibly scary. I didn't realize how terrifying it was until I spent the night with the same hotel room as my parents. This was before my dad was diagnosed, and I heard him do this, and it scared me. So when my partner jolted me awake one night and said that I wasn't breathing, I knew exactly what was going on. I said, "Did it sound like this?" And she was like, "Yes." And I'm like, "Okay, then I have sleep apnea. Damn it." And so what you have to do then is you use a machine called a continuous positive air pressure machine, or CPAP. And you wear this little mask, this little like bubble thing, and it's connected to your face with a mask that goes around your head like that. Okay? And it's connected by a hose to a little machine. And the machine delivers a certain amount of air pressure, and it's just enough air pressure to lift this, to make this go away, to lift up your um, collapsed airway while you're sleeping. So then you have good airflow. And it doesn't deliver oxygen. All it does is there's a hole in the back of it with a filter, and it pulls air in, it mixes it with water, and then pushes it out into your body, and it just keeps your airway open. And it breathes with you. So when you breathe in, it delivers the pressure, and then when you exhale, it receives the signal that it receives the reverse pressure, and it actually stops pumping air. And so you respire out, you breathe, so it goes like it. You can hear it. It's not that loud. It's like as you breathe in and out. It's actually, I think it's really, I can't sleep without it. Like some people with sleep apnea can sleep without their machine. They'll just like, I don't want to sleep with it tonight, so they don't, and they don't feel well because they stop breathing. I can't even fall asleep without it on, and it's amazing. It's one of the best things that ever happened to me. Um, it is like sleeping with an octopus on your face, though, because you've got this like little bubble thing on your face, and you've got like harness around your whole head. So like you can't sleep on your stomach. You can only sleep on your back and side, but it's okay. And then restless leg syndrome is another thing that happens. I had a partner with this, and it was really freaky. Um, but essentially, what happens is your brain sends these weird impulses down to your legs, and you feel like you have something on them, so you're like kicking all night. And like you'll just be laying there, and all of a sudden, kick, 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 and it's like, are you awake? And they're completely asleep. So both of these things, what happens is it interrupts your sleep cycle. So we all go through sleep cycles. There are, I think, 4 stages of sleep. The last is rapid eye movement, and that's when your eyes, if you were to actually lift the eye, like pull the eyelids apart, you'd see the eye like kind of twittering a little bit, and it's because your brain is has shut down to the most stasis state possible and is recharging. It's essentially what's happening. That's probably not the most scientific explanation, but it's the best way to describe it. If you don't get into REM sleep, you don't actually rest. You're not actually sleeping. You're resting. And so, for example, if you want to take a nap during the day, then you need to sleep, I want to say an hour and a half. So a full sleep cycle lasts about 90 minutes. There's 5 stages of sleep. Um, so you want to sleep for at least, if you take a nap, you should take a 90-minute nap because you'll get through an entire sleep cycle. Otherwise, you just rest, and if you don't get into REM or rapid eye movement sleep, then you're not getting any rest. And so what happens when you have sleep apnea or restless leg syndrome is every time you get that you stop breathing or you start to kick, it wakes you up and it resets the sleep cycle, so you never get to REM. Um, I think REM lasts about 45 minutes, so it takes us about 45 minutes to fully fall asleep. So that's another little tidbit of information. What about reproduction? Is sex after 60 a thing? Well, yes and no. You can have sex pretty much at any time in your life. The problem is you can't reproduce after your mid 30s. So we are starting to see in adulthood a trend where people are choosing to delay having children until their 30s. Makes perfect sense. It's hard to be, you really are not financially or economically stable in your 20s. It's probably wise to wait till you have you're better established in your job and you've had the time to find a partner that is good for you and you're not rushing into anything. If of course you're in your 20s and you are married and you have kids, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that either. But a lot of people are starting to feel that it's better to have them in their 30s, and that's okay. The problem is, though, is that women in their mid 30s, there's a greater likelihood of fertility problems once you hit about 35. So if you don't start reproducing about the age of 28, you are going to have a little bit more trouble. Potentially. You also have higher risk pregnancies, and you run the risk of having a child who has a learning disability like autism or Down syndrome. Those are associated with late older mother pregnancies. Um, Men, though, are pretty much able to reproduce whenever they want. Now, they do start to see semen production declining after the age of 40, which is perhaps why we start to see issues with the prostate around the late 40s. But we don't see as much semen. But that doesn't mean that you're not producing sperm. It just means that the liquid the sperm's delivered in isn't as in such quick supply, so you're probably not able to like turn around as quickly as possible. Which is why men stop being, I'm trying to think of a polite way to say it. That's why we see impotence, right? The penis is designed to stop pressuring you into having sex at all hours because you don't have the ability to reproduce or to produce semen and sperm in the same rate. Now, reproductive ability does start to change in middle adulthood. We see the climacteric period, and this is when a period of fertility declines and leads to irreversible reproductive changes. For women, this lasts for 10 years. The average age is about 51, which means if it's a 10-year period and it starts at the age of 51, you'll be 61 by the time it's over. You'll hear a lot of women talk about the menopause. It's awful. Essentially, what's happening is you stop producing estrogen, and your body has to adjust to not having as much estrogen. And so you go through hot flashes, you go through moodiness. It is literally the worst thing that ever happens. This happens for about 10 years, though the actual like hard parts of menopause don't. Like the hot flashes and stuff, that may last for like a year or so. Just think of it as well, not even think of it as it is reverse adolescence. You're adjusting to, when you go through adolescence, you're adjusting to having the hormones increase. Now you're having to adjust in reverse. Men also go through climacteric, male menopause, and their fertility is reduced, but it never completely diminishes. So for women, at the end of menopause, you cannot reproduce. You're no longer producing eggs. You're no longer able to reproduce. Men can still reproduce. It's just not as diminished. It's not you're not as virile as you once were. Now with Viagra, yeah, you can get your parts in order to do the deed, but you may not be able to make a deposit. So it's just the body's way of saying, okay, you've reproduced. Now I'll spend the rest of your life just kind of being cute and cuddly, and going to Perkins and getting the 55 plus menu specials. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm looking forward to that time in my life when I don't have the pressures of having to always be like be pretty and be on the game. Like, it's just better to. I'm looking forward to the days of the 55 plus menu. Like, I would already order off of it if they would let me. Now we this may not seem intuitive to be lumped in with physical changes, but it's still important because a lot of times these physical changes can make the increase in substance use very prevalent, but can also um, make it a lot worse to be an alcohol user or an abuser. So in terms of substance abuse, alcohol is not that prevalent, 9.2% and 4.6% for men and for women. We talked about the onset. For men, it's usually in adolescence and early adulthood. Women, it doesn't really happen until 20s or 30s. So men are out drinking a lot earlier, um, and then it kind of starts to go down. And this is because we give men in our society a lot more freedom, so they're able to experiment with alcohol sooner. Women, it tends to be once they go off to college. Now, in terms of the prognosis of alcohol abuse, if you are an alcohol abuser and as an adult, there's a 60% chance that you're going to relapse after beginning treatment. Now, why is this? Is it because there's no hope for you, or is it because the treatments generally are crap? Well, the treatments generally are crap. That's 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 the unfortunate answer. Um, Most treatments are abstinence-only treatments, and when we talked about with sexual health, abstinence only doesn't work. You cannot expect people to just quit something and not ever do it. It doesn't work. It is unreasonable. It is not at all scientifically based. It's just based on this very, very harmful philosophical idea that people who who drink alcohol, who smoke marijuana, who have sex, have some kind of like self-control issue and they're somehow like bad and they have to the only way to not be bad anymore is to not do it. Well, there's nothing wrong with drinking alcohol. There's nothing wrong with smoking a little bit. You know, if it's legal, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's a drug. This is a drug. Caffeine is a drug, right? Like this is legal. It's not a big deal, right? To enjoy a glass of wine or two. The problem is when it becomes abusive, when you start to become dependent on it. But expecting people to just quit it and never use it again is unreasonable. And so, what actually does work is what people typically don't fund, what state doesn't fund, health systems don't provide, people aren't trained in, and that is teaching people to regulate their emotions and regulate their self control. And so, that actually does work. And then they don't need the alcohol or the drug as a substance, as a coping skill, because people drink to excess to cope. People smoke to excess to cope with what's going on. So if you teach them a more effective way to cope, you don't need to tell them not to drink anymore. Essentially, all that you're doing in these abstinence-only programs is you're either if the for the people it does work. So AA is an example of an abstinence-only program. It's not scientifically efficacious. There's no evidence to suggest that it works. It does work for some people, though. It just means by and large it does not actually is not effective. For the people it works for, get rid of alcohol as a coping strategy and they use the group as their coping strategy. That is healthy. That's fine. But for most people, that's not what happens. And for most people, AA doesn't work. And so, and sobriety or this idea of being abstinent from alcohol is not it's not healthy. It puts a value judgment on it, and it's just not healthy. So, what does work though are these programs that teach people to portion alcohol or to portion the drug that they're using and to um, regulate their emotions without using alcohol. Cigarettes, fortunately, we've seen a large decrease in cigarettes, 40 to 25% in use over the past 40 years, which is amazing. We are seeing an increase, though, in younger adults and adolescents, but we are seeing it go down in adults. Um, and the reason we see an increase in adolescents, I'm not too concerned about it. I think it has to do with access. It's easier to get a cigarette than alcohol, so um, because people tend to have them around the house or it's just easier to grab one cigarette than it is to like get an alcohol. You can quickly put it in your pocket or something. Most people start smoking before the age of 21. However, reducing adult smokers is important because it can lead to drastic health improvements. It can reduce lung and heart disease, teeth and gum disease, um, cancer. I mean, reducing it and think about you lose lung and heart capacity already. So if you're clogging your arteries with smoke or with tobacco and all the harm, and really it's not even tobacco, it's the harmful products that they use to make the cigarettes that are what the formaldehyde and the other carcinogens that you're literally imbibing with a cigarette. That doesn't mean that chewing tobacco is any better for you. It's actually worse because it leads to gum decay, tooth decay, which can increase the risk for heart disease. But it's not like a commercial from the Ad Council. But yeah, so quitting can actually really improve adult health. So it's why we spend a lot of energy and money trying to reduce that, because it really can improve a person's health. So what does this have to do with the mind? And we're going to start next time talking about cognitive development, and we'll move into emotional development as well. There is a model that proposes there is a connection between the body and mind, and it proposes that hostility and stress, so feeling upset or anxious over the changes that happen, lead to stress, and that is linked to poor health and illness. It can increase your heart rate and blood pressure and increase the production of stress hormones. And so, what this means is that in adulthood, though our state of mental health can greatly affect our physical health. And the other way around, too, if we're physically ill, that can make us stressed out, which is going to make us feel even worse. And so, one of the best ways in adulthood to manage this and to promote global or general health is to engage in stress management. It's critical. So, doing problem centered coping. So, you know, I'm stressed out because I have to get Johnny to soccer practice and Katie to jiu-jitsu practice, and I have to finish this report that's due at midnight, and my husband is not going to be home at the normal time because he has a meeting, and I'm stressed out. So problem-centered coping will be figuring out a way to deal with all of that. Um, Exercise and social support are also very important. This theory also proposes that if you have a hearty or optimistic personality, that can really help. So if you're the kind of person who's able to just kind of like push past stress, then you're going to be much better off physically and psychologically in adulthood. All right, as we prepare for class 22, read pages 451 to 445 and then 501 to 517 and 563 to 582 in the textbook. I want you to think about this question. What cognitive changes are left? Remember to start working on the final project this week. Watch the video that I'm posting after class. Remember the quiz is due tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. and that we have our first project work day on Friday. And I'll send out an email about that. All right, thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful day. It's good to see you again, and we will talk tomorrow. Bye.